Welcome to Pathway. We're so glad you're with us today. If you're new here, we'd love to get to know you. We invite you to fill out a digital Connect card on the PCC at Home app or pccfw.tv, or text the word Connect to Pathway text number. To all of you who have continued to give support financially during this time, we want to say thank you. We're so grateful, and we want you to know that from online worship to Pathway groups to community outreach, your generosity has made ministry possible. If you'd like to give, there are several ways you can do that. There are give buttons on our website at pccfw.tv and on the PCC at Home mobile app. You can also text the word give to our text number, or you can mail a check to the PCC office. For all the latest COVID-related updates, be sure to visit our website. Just click the red banner at the top of the page to view new announcements and find quick links for Kid City Online, content for students, adults, and more. You can also access all of this through the COVID link on the PCC at Home app. As always, our services will continue to air at pccfw.tv, so if your health is vulnerable, we hope you'll continue to be part of our online community. Thanks again for choosing to show up here.
so grateful that we know you as faithful and mighty and just constant, God. We're so grateful for your love, that you came, and you came for us, each of us. God, it blows our minds, and I'm so grateful. I thank you. We come this morning and open our hearts to you, Lord. Teach us, minister to us, and meet us where we're at as we come to just be with you. We love you, Lord. It's in Jesus' name.
Morning, everybody. Morning. Hey, I want to remind you on something coming up in a couple weeks. We are doing this 21 days of prayer. Hopefully, you're engaging with this. Wednesday morning's been great around here at 7 in the morning for that time. And on the 28th, Sunday night, the 28th, 6 p.m., we're going to gather together to kind of cap it all off that evening. And we are trying to figure out what space to do this in down here in the venue. And so all we want you to do, this is not reserving a seat, but actually this is kind of getting you ready for Easter. Because on Easter, we're going to ask you to actually reserve a seat on Easter. But so this kind of gets you in the habit of it. But if you'll just kind of take the number that's down here and text worship, and there might be a way to indicate how many of you are coming. That way we can just best know how to serve us all on that evening and make sure we have plenty of space to do what we're supposed to do there, but also make sure we have the right space in which to do it. Well, we're in a series called How to Live Strong in a World Gone Wrong. And we're in the book of Daniel. So if you have your Bibles, want to turn to Daniel chapter 2, you can. So far, what we've done is we've looked at the importance of standing strong in who you are. The very first week, Daniel just living according to the identity that he had and certainly had in his Lord. Don't let culture conform you to his identity. Last week, Brad did a fantastic job of walking us through this element of temptation, to stand strong so you do not give in to temptation. This morning, I want to talk to you about fear, about standing strong against fear. How many of you have ever had some fear in your life? Yeah, we all have. And in fact, Max Lucado said it well. He said, we fear being sued, finishing last, going broke. We fear the mole on the back, the new kid on the block, the sound of the clock as it ticks us closer to the grave. We sophisticate investment plans, create elaborate security systems, stronger military, yet we depend on mood-altering drugs more than any generation of history. The average child today has the same level of anxiety as the average psychiatric patient in the 1950s. Fear never wrote a symphony or poem, negotiated a peace treaty or cured disease. Fear never pulled a family out of poverty or a country out of bigotry. Fear never saved a marriage or a business. Courage did that. Faith did that. People who refused to consult, to cower to the timidities did that. But fear itself, fear herds us into a prison of unlocked doors. Wouldn't it be great to walk out? And yet today we fear conspiracies and vaccines and a virus and lost opportunities and political elections and all that goes along with that in the course of our lives today, currently in 2021. And regardless, fear is still present no matter what the face that fear wears. And we aren't the first people to experience fear. We're not going to be the last people to experience fear. As a matter of fact, we see this issue of fear show up in actually Daniel chapter 2. King Nebuchadnezzar has all the power and all the authority for his kingdom. Fears he's going to lose it. And he's really fearing losing power and control. So he ends up projecting his fear on others. And he tried to do so on Daniel. But what we're going to find here is that Daniel refuses to let that fear be projected upon him. Instead, he puts that fear towards his God. And so here's the big idea for you this morning as we walk into it. Just simply this, and that is your fears will only be as great as your dependence upon God's presence. The more you depend upon God's presence, the less the fear. The more you depend upon your fear, the less a sense of God's presence. And what we see in Daniel chapter 2 is we see that Nebuchadnezzar's fear, his fear moved him to a place of desperation on others. Look at Genesis. Look at Daniel chapter 2, and just let's read the first 6 verses of Daniel 2 to kind of set the stage. And as I read through this, you kind of got to read between the lines a little bit. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled, and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, the astrologers, to tell him what he had dreamed. And when they came and they stood before the king, he said to them, I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. And then the astrologers answered the king, may the king live forever. Tell your servant the dreams, and we will interpret it. The king replied to the astrologers, this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I'll have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and a great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me. So just kind of settle in that for just a moment. This is towards the end of Daniel's kind of a simulation program. And Nebuchadnezzar starts to have this dream. And it's a reoccurring dream about the same thing. The problem is he couldn't remember the dream. You know, it was driving him crazy is what it was doing. I mean, some of us, we've had dreams and we remember those dreams. They're very vivid dreams. You remember those dreams. Other times you have dreams, you wake up from the dream and it's such a good dream you want to get back into the dream. And so you go back to sleep thinking, let me get back in the dream. You know, I want to get back into this dream. Other dreams you're like, what was that all about? I don't want to touch that dream at all. Well, Nebuchadnezzar has this dream. It's a reoccurring dream. And he cannot figure out what the dream is. It keeps coming up time and time and time again. So he goes to sleep. He has this dream. He wakes up from the dream. He's banging his head against the wall, trying to remember the dream. He goes to sleep, trying all over again. The dream comes. Remember kind of this groundhog kind of dreaming is what he was doing. And you and I have a dream, and we don't really care a whole lot about the meaning behind it. We're not searching deeply into the meaning, at least for the most part. But in the Near East, in the Near Ancient East, actually dreams meant an awful lot. Let me just give you a little thought here from one historian. He said, in the ancient Near Eastern world, dreams were real. They were not an extension of one's conscious or unconscious mind. Dreams were the world of the divine and the demonic. Dreams had meaning too. They often revealed the future. They could show the dreamer the right decision to make. People even went to temples or holy places to sleep in order to have a dream which would show them the decision to make. If you come here and want to sleep here, to try to find a dream, we'll have you carried out, is what we'll have you do. But not during that time. The dreams of common people were important to them. but the dreams of kings and holy men or women were important on a national and international scale. One of the results was that many of the nations surrounding Israel had religious figures who were skilled in the interpretation of dreams. These figures could be consulted at the highest level of government for important decisions. In such nations as Egypt and Assyria, these interpreters even developed dream books by which they could give interpretations according to the symbols of a dream. And yet some dreams were so complex that they would ask for an interpretation. And so the king or the official would bring in these individuals who would give them the details of the dream. So Nebuchadnezzar, he couldn't remember the dream. And so his expectation was this: I can't remember the dream. I'm going to ask you to tell me the dream that I've been having, and then tell me what the meaning is behind the dream. And if you don't do that, trouble's coming your way. So he calls them magicians, literally magicians who functioned as scribes. Enchanters, they could communicate with the dead. Sorcerers, they practiced sorcery and divination and astrology. Astrologers, they studied the heavens to determine the future. And so he's so desperate to have this dream that he grabbed really anyone, any of the four, brought him into his chamber and said, one of you figure this thing out. One of you have to tell me what's going on, because this thing is consuming me. And really what it is that it's creating a lot of fear in Nebuchadnezzar. And so his fear is revealed through the harshness of his decree when he pronounced that anyone who could not interpret his dream, that they would be put to death, be cut into pieces, and their houses would be destroyed. And so as I thought about this, and I thought about just Nehemiah's element of fear, how we tend to find ourselves in a moment of fear, and what tends to happen in some of our lives, I really thought about really four things for him. One was imagination kicked in. He couldn't figure this dream out. He knew it had something to do with his kingdom. It had something to do with what was going on in his rule and his life. He couldn't figure it out. And so the king's imagination begins to go wild, and all it did was spin greater and greater and greater fear. That's what happens when we dwell on our fear. It begins to spin its way into our heads, and it becomes bigger than what it actually is. And it's why when couples or individuals come to my office and maybe they're facing a really difficult situation, maybe it's a diagnosis of a cancer diagnosis, and we've got a couple families like that right here at Pathway that are really grappling with a very significant diagnosis within their life. And the one thing I always tell them is don't create roads that don't exist yet. Because we often do. We begin to create these roads and we think this is where it's going to go. It's like, don't create any roads yet that don't exist. Stay on the road you're on right now. Work to not awfulize the situation. Don't drill deeper holes with your fear. And then for Nebuchadnezzar, he moved from this imagination of what could possibly happen here to intimidation. And then to anger. And then out of his anger came this element of control. And so what did all this talk and the king's rage do? Well, it moved everyone in his kingdom, all of these people that would interpret these dreams, to a place of fear and hiding and chaos and conflict and awfulizing. You think any of that's going on today? Absolutely. Absolutely. And so the fact is they knew this guy's going to carry out his threats. But Daniel makes a decision, and he makes a decision to stand strong in the face of the fear. He doesn't panic. He doesn't throw in the towel of his faith. He doesn't cower. Matter of fact, what we find here is that actually kind of lives out this element of 2 Timothy 1:7 when it says simply this: for God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but a spirit of power, of love, and of self-discipline. What Daniel does when he hears this news, and we'll see this in a moment, is that he simply steps back from it all. He steps back, and he just takes it in, and in a spirit of timidity, he begins to process more of what's going on. How do I approach this? How do I deal with this? How do I walk into this? Matter of fact, the more you meditate on a problem, somebody said it well, the bigger, the scarier, and the more unsolvable it appears. A blood test you get back, a problem in your marriage, a child who grows distant, age creeps up on you, and you realize that it's creeping up on you really fast. A marriage ends, a family member tragically dies, someone close to you commits a horrible criminal act. You are confronted with a deep injustice. You're living in Texas, and you face a sudden deep freeze, and pipes burst, and no water, and toilets no longer flush, and feel like you're living in a third world country. What controls your meditation will control your thoughts about God, yourself, others, your situation, and even the nature of life itself. It will. And so what Nebuchadnezzar does is he moves to desperation, puts it on other people. What Daniel does is Daniel's concern moves him to a place of dependence upon God. He doesn't turn away from God. He moves to God in his fear. Look at Daniel 2, 14 through 18. Look at his posture. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, "Why did the king issue such a harsh decree?" Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went into the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. And then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Notice the text doesn't call them Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It gives them those names, those Hebrew names that were behind their meaning. It's interesting. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning the mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men in Babylon. Daniel stays calm in the conflict. As I just kind of spent some time just in those few verses in Daniel this past week, I just sat back and I just kind of thought, okay, what was Daniel doing here? What's practical for all of us that we do, that we can do in the midst of a fearful situation within our lives? And how do we walk through the situation of this world that we're dealing with right now? And here's what he does. He seeks perspective. He seeks perspective. And he does it in, again, this spirit of timidity. Why is the king acting so harsh? He steps back, looking for wisdom, looking for insight. Doesn't allow his anger to move into this. His fear doesn't drive him into a conversation that's going to end up exploding things and dividing things. And then he does this. He asks for space. He asks for a timeout, is what he does. It's like when you're having a battle within your marriage. You're battling your spouse and you're going nose to nose, or one of your kids going nose to nose, and you're not getting anywhere. All you're doing is going deeper and deeper. There comes a moment where you need to say, time out. Time out. You go to your corner, and I'll go to my corner, and we'll calm down, and then we'll come down and we'll figure this thing out. He says, give me a time out here. I need to figure this out a little bit. And then he invites others in. He goes to those who know how to pray. He goes to those who know how to pray. It's why every Sunday morning after the service, we invite you, if you've got a prayer concern, we have people that are part of our prayer team that are down front willing to pray with you on a weekly basis. Last evening, Erica and Ryan Hyatt. Erica has received just a really challenging diagnosis of cancer, and 4 little kids. And last night we all gathered around Erica and Ryan, and a group of us gathered around. The elders gathered around her, and members of her friends and her family, and members of this body. And we just came around her, inviting others in to come into your situation. And what he does then is he keeps God at the center. He seeks perspective. He asks for space. He invites others in. And in the midst of doing that, he keeps God in the center of the situation, always putting God back in the middle of whatever it is that you're walking through and that you're dealing with. He refused to be intimidated by the control of the king. He was not going to allow fear to drive his decisions, but instead allowed the circumstance to drive him to the Lord by anchoring himself in God's power, the fact that God is greater than the problem, and he's certainly greater than this king. God's promises that he's at work in the midst of it. God's plan, he is going to work out his plan through it. God's presence, he is right here with us right now, near to us. God's character, he's sovereign, he is good, he is faithful, he is true. Listen, Daniel didn't nearly understand the things of God. He knew God personally. And this is why it's so important that you're cultivating this personal relationship with the Lord on a regular basis, where you're inviting him into your situation, into your circumstances, where you're into his word on a daily basis, and you're just studying, you're just spending time, maybe it's just 15 minutes a day in the word, where you're just spending time allowing it to get into you and just reflecting on it and being guided through it and learning the truth about who your Lord is and what your Lord has done for you. I love Isaiah 41:10. As a matter of fact, this verse hangs in my bedroom. It hangs on the wall directly in front of my bed. I looked at it again last night. I mean, it's just one of those things I look at night, and then I see it again in the morning. And when I'm sitting there during the day, if I'm there during the day, I see it again. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, and I will help you, and I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. So do not fear. This is as much of a promise for you and for all of us. For do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed. I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. I mean, the truth is, we don't know. We don't know if Daniel prayed with his 3 friends. But what we do know is that he went to bed. He went to bed. John Phillips writes, "Then Daniel went off to bed. Such was his confidence in God. It was a good thing that he did not pace the floor of his room all night, agonizing in his soul. He would have missed the answer to his prayer. As it was, God rewarded his sweet and simple trust instantly. And as Daniel slept, God gave his trustful servant the same dream that he had given Nebuchadnezzar the night before. He refused to focus on the size of his problem. Instead, he put his focus on the size of his God." Look at 20 through 23 of chapter 2. And again, we don't have it for you on the screen, but here's what he does. He receives the dream. He sees the vision. He gets the vision. And God gives him this vision. And then Daniel responds by saying, "Praise be to the name of God and Father, God of forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He disposes kings and raises others up. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and I praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we ask of you. You have made known to us the dream of this king." He puts God in the center. And in the end, he tells the king the dream, and the king elevates Daniel to a new level of influence as a result of it. Verses 48 through 49, it says, Then he, this is Nebuchadnezzar, placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him the ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all of its wise men. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained in the royal court. I mean, I'm going to trust God. I'm going to be faithful to God. And God responds by being faithful to Daniel. So what's the application for us all? In light of everything we're going through and the things that we're walking through right now, and certainly as a nation, but even for some of you within the context of your everyday life and what you're dealing with, what's the application? Let me give you just a few things to think about. Here's first. Listen to God's voice more than man's voice. Listen to God's voice more than man's voice. Who are you listening to these days? Who are you listening to? Truth is, garbage in, garbage out. And faulty data, as one said so well, faulty data produces faulty results. So who are you listening to these days? What is the intent of their messaging? What are the emotions that their voices are producing in you? What is the fruit that is being cultivated in your life? Because all of that is going to be determined by what you listen to. It really will. Remember a couple weeks ago when I gave you this graph and we talked about this couple that the wife was having all sorts of challenges in her life, and there's a lot of outside influences kind of speaking into her, and her husband asked her, "What are you feeling right now? What are you experiencing right now?" And she said, "A desire for control and fear and anxiety and worry." And he said, "Well, out of that, who are you?" She said, "Well, I'm afraid." She said, I feel out of control. I feel like I've got all this weight coming up on my shoulders." And he said, "Well, what has God done? I feel like he's abandoned me. I feel like he doesn't care." She said, "Well, who is God then?" She said, "I feel like he's out of control. I feel like he's impotent." And he said, when she said that, he thought, "Oh, we're in deep, deep weeds." And he said, "Well, let's just kind of reverse that. And let's ask for some forgiveness for that. And let me start here. Who is God? He's faithful. He's good. He's trustworthy. He's loving. He's all-powerful. He knows all things. Exactly. What has God done? He sent his son Jesus to go to a cross to pay the penalty for my sins. Then who are you? I'm a daughter of God. I'm a child of God. I am loved. I'm his workmanship. Then what is that producing then in your life? Peace and love and joy and hope. See, it many times it's determined by the voices that you're listening to. Matter of fact, Romans 12:1 and 2, we said it a couple weeks ago, that we can make a decision. Am I going to be conformed to this world, allow the world, the outside issues to affect who I am, or am I going to be transformed by the renewing of the Spirit through what the Spirit of Christ wants to do in me and through me? Every single day, followers of Christ have a choice. Whose voice will we listen to? The world's choice or God's voice? The world's voice or God's voice? When I started this series, when I announced I was going to do this series, Sue Ann Nichols, her and Don have been here from the very beginning of the church. She sent me just kind of a link to a book by Randy Osborne. He's a pastor out in California, called Thriving in Babylon. And this book was written in 2015 is when it was written. And I'm going to read you a little section from this book. And what I know is this. Some of you are going to get really mad at me, and you're not going to come back. And but the whole thing is he writes and reflects on a major issue that happened in 1999. I don't know if you remember what happened in 1999, but in 1999, anybody remember what was going to go on the end of 1999? It was Y2k. Y2k. And so this is what he says about this. And this will just give you a little bit of feel of what pastors experience in moments of crisis and changes of all sorts of things going on in our country. He said they called it Y2k Bug. They claimed it would produce the mother of all computer glitches. They warned of elevators suddenly stuck, cars stalling, airplanes crashing, and the nuclear plants melting down. Many feared it was going to usher in a worldwide economic crisis. Their concerns created quite a stir, especially among folks who are prone to buy into conspiracy theories and catastrophizing. By mid-1999, I was under immense pressure from a small but vocal contingent at my church to set up a co-op food bank, preach Y2K sermons, and prepare our congregation for the looming disaster. When I resisted, they plied me with books and tapes. I remember one particular harrowing recording in which an influential Christian voice at the time predicted the total breakdown of American society, massive disobedience, looting, food shortages, and a potential worldwide economic collapse, followed by global conflict as dictators seized the opportunity. When I pushed back and pointed out that the internal clocks in the computers of that era were notoriously inaccurate, which should have already resulted in reports of numerous stuck elevators and immobilized automobiles, I was sloughed off. They had their own experts telling them differently. When I pointed out that real-life computer programs and the government didn't seem too concerned, they told me it was due to a conspiracy of silence. The government had no idea how to fix the problem. So in order to keep the uninformed masses from panicking, they were covering up the problems as they frantically searched for a solution. Others told me that President Clinton, that he was keeping it out of the media because they planned to exploit the resulting chaos and crisis by imposing martial law and installing him as president for life. It was a debate I couldn't win. They had an answer for everything. That's how it was with conspiracy and catastrophizers. There's no way to convince them until after the fact. Their experts will always trump yours, and the absence of any hard evidence will simply be chalked up as further proof that the conspiracy is widespread and powerful. And then he goes on. But as bad as the impact of catastrophizing can be upon our witness, its an impact upon our spiritual life is even worse. It kills our hope, and it feeds our fear. We may talk as if we trust Jesus, but if we live most of our lives in a state of fear and worry, it's empty cliche. When we fall prey to conspiracy theories and catastrophizing, we not only end up worrying about the things that are highly unlikely to happen, but we also forget that even if they did happen, God would still be with us. Most of us know Psalm 23. Many of us can quote it. God is with us in the valley. Most of us know that Jesus promised to never leave us. And most of us know how God promised to never leave us never give us more than we can handle. But once we slide into the swamp of conspiracy and catastrophizing, we forget all that. We end up fixating on the things that we fear rather than the God that we follow. In addition, we imagine facing the things we dread with the spiritual strength we currently have. We forget that even if everything we're worried about happens, we won't have to face it with the spiritual strength. We won't have to face it with the spiritual strength we currently have. We'll face it in the strength that God provides the day that it actually happens. Who are you listening to? God's voice or man's voice? What else does Daniel do? Live aware of God's presence. Live aware of God's presence. Burglar breaks into a house. He's breaking into this house and he hears this voice that says, Jesus is watching you. He's kind of walking around and he's going to the next room. He said, Jesus is watching you. He hears it and he takes his flashlight, points it over. There's a parrot sitting in this cage. And the parrot looks at him, Jesus is watching you. And he says, so you're the one telling me that? Yes. Well, what's your name? Clarence. Well, that's a stupid name. Who would name a parrot Clarence? The same people who named the Doberman Jesus. Jesus, sick him, you know. Jesus is always watching you. But being aware of God's presence will allow us to realize that not only is he watching to see our faithfulness, but also to realize that he's watching over us. He is with us. Peter Adams said it well. We can never escape God's presence, and we can never invite him to be present. He is present everywhere. He is present before we are present. That's why in Joshua 1:5, we're able to hang on to that truth that I will never forsake you. It's why in Matthew 28, we can hold on to that truth that I am with you always. It's why we can hold on to the truth in Psalm 46, where it says that God is our refuge and our strength and our ever-present help in times of trouble. And even though it may feel as if the mountains are falling in the very heart of the sea, our God is with us. It's why in Psalm 139 it tells us that it doesn't matter where you go. It doesn't matter if it's in the dark. It doesn't matter if it's in the light. God is with you. He sees you. It's why in John 14, when Jesus is giving those final words to his disciples before his departure, he tells them that I'm going to send another comforter. He is an advocate for you. He's the Holy Spirit. He's not only going to be with you, but he's going to be in you. And yet the enemy uses intimidation and fear to draw us away from the Lord. And fear, what it does is it creates amnesia, and it leads us to God forgetfulness. It reduces the size of our God to be less than the perceived threats of what is causing the fear. And what the enemy loves to do is he loves to undermine our confidence of God, to confuse us, to produce conflict in us as well as with others, to consume us with the size of the problem opposed to the size of our God. But being aware of God's presence is really the first step in all of it. Matter of fact, Charles Stanley talks about this very fact of that when we act on God's presence, the following will be realities in our life, and that is that he'll continually be in our thoughts, both conscious and unconscious. We persistently will begin to seek his guidance. We'll view the Lord as our constant companion. We'll live aware that God helps us and sees everything in light of his presence. We will experience God's peace in the midst of a storm. His presence will create a hunger within us for the Word of God. We'll live with an awareness of the Lord and bringing joy to our hearts, where we become more conscious of the good things that God is sending our way and how God is providing for us in our time of need, that the Lord's presence causes us to continue to live in dependence upon him, that prayer becomes a priority in our life because we know he's there, we know he's interested, we find ourselves just speaking to him through the course of our day. We consider needs in light of his presence. Our worship becomes authentic and rewarding. We have this strong, intimate, growing relationship with Christ. So lean into him. And the last is this: focus on who God is. Focus on who God is. You know, I love Isaiah 40 and Isaiah 41. Matter of fact, those two chapters, in many ways, the truth in these chapters have guided me over the past number of years, and I just love them. I love these two chapters, but I love it towards the end of Isaiah 40. We see these words and these words of promise, and just kind of let them kind of soak in over you this morning as I read them. And this is what it has to say to us: to whom will you compare me? Or who is my equal, says the Holy One. Lift up your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all of these? He who brings out the starry host one by one and calls forth each of them by name. Because of his great power and strength, not one of them is missing. Why do you complain, Jacob? Why do you say, Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, my cause is disregarded by my God? Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary. He increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. Isaiah 41 says, so do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, and I will help you, and I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. How you doing this morning? Find yourself listening more to man's voice opposed to God's voice? You find yourself more focused on the issue that's consuming you rather than the God that is right there with you? Are you finding yourself feeling more aware of all the trouble around you rather than the fact of God's presence that's near to you? How are you doing with that today? Jay Shipley, Jay and Kathy attend here. They've been here for a long time, and they usually sit right over here about 9 a.m. And a little over a week ago, Jay had a heart transplant, and he's up in Chicago. And as it does with anything, anytime there's a transplant, it doesn't always go well initially. You know, your body has to respond to that. And so the other night we got a text, and he was just really, there's some things going on in his body as it related to this new heart. And so our small group, just as we do, began to pray out for him. And I just sent him Psalm 40. Lord's near to you. He's with you. And the reality that things don't always go as we think they should go, and yet we can lean into the Lord in that moment. And they're hanging on to that. This past week in our city, those 3 young men that were shot and killed, 2 of them, Anderson Reddick and Joshua Cooper. Jalen Rice is still in the hospital, recovering. Jalen was the cousin, I believe, of Joshua. So you have 2 sisters sitting in the hospital. One who's grieving the loss of her son and praying for her nephew, and one who's praying for the life of her son and grieving for her nephew. It's just tragic. These guys 2 of them were involved in city life here in Fort Wayne, and as a staff, we've been praying. I know many of you have been praying, just praying for what this means for our community, but most of all, I've been praying for what this means for their family, for their moms, for their siblings, for their extended family, and what it can mean for us in our city. We can invite God into a situation like this, see His redeeming, healing work at work. So I'm going to pray, and we're going to sing. Lord, I know there are a lot of concerns in this room this morning. I know that for me, it's so easy to hone in on what others are saying. It's even easy to hone in on what other voices of truth are saying. And yet I need to keep coming back to what your word says, the truth of your character and who you are. We pray for Jay and Kathy that you would just continue to bring strength to Jay's body. I think of Erica, and I think of Amy and the struggle they're going through as it relates to their cancer, and pray that you would just continue to give them perspective and insight, give them a sense of your peace, your presence. I know that in this room there are marriages that are probably at odds, and some maybe even hanging by a thread. I pray, Lord, that those couples would have the ability to put you into the center of it. For some of us, it may be relationships that we're wrestling through and working through, and again, give wisdom and guidance. For others, it may be a loss of finance. It could be a wrestle with a job. It could be fear over all that is going on around us and allowing it to consume us. And I pray that we would realize that you're in charge, you're sovereign. You know all things. We can trust you with all things. Lord, I pray for these families, for Anderson's family, for Joshua's family, for Jalen's family. I pray, Lord, that they would sense an overwhelming presence of you, Jesus, in this. That as our community is reaching out to them, they would sense that they are loved by you. They would understand that we have a Savior who understands everything we are going through, identifies with us. That, Lord, they would sense your presence through the love and the care and the compassion of those that are around them. And continue to give Jalen strength and health within his body. Father, you're good, you're gracious, you're kind, you're loving, you're faithful, you're merciful. Father, you're forgiving. We understand that you judge all things appropriately and right and correctly, that you hold all things together, and that, God, you have a plan, and you work that plan out. And I pray that as a church, that we would be light in the midst of all the darkness. This world's been dark since the fall. It feels like it's getting darker and darker at times, and yet what an opportunity for the light to shine brighter and brighter. And may we as a church be a good reflection of that. In the way we show hope to others, love to others, confidence to others, concern to others, grace. Most of all, we demonstrate Jesus in the tangible ways that we express our care to those around us. We love you. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Just sit for a few moments and kind of let this sing over you.
Such an awesome God, so selfless, so generous, so faithful you are. Such an awesome God, so mighty, so holy, so wonderful. Such an awesome God, so selfless, so generous, so faithful you are. And nothing comes close to the Lord Almighty, nothing as sweet as your love and mercy.
such an awesome God, so selfless, so generous, so faithful you are.
Stand together. I want to tell you, there's some folks down front love to pray with you this morning. Maybe you got a concern and it's something you're walking through. They can just simply come around you and pray for you. If you're guest with us this morning, welcome to Pathway. Stop by Guest Central on the way out. If you're looking for what's next steps for you here as well, stop by Next Steps, and have a great week, everybody. We'll see you later.
Thank you again for worshiping with us today. If you'd like someone to pray with you, there are members of our church online team or our staff who would love to do that. Simply click on the live prayer button at pccfw.tv or click the conversation bubble on the PCC at Home app. We encourage you to continue your worship through giving. Just click the Give button on the web or the app, or text the word GIVE. Finally, be sure to check the web or the app for the latest updates and at-home resources. We also share many updates through Facebook, Instagram, and our weekly e-news, so be sure to follow or subscribe. Have a great week, and we'll see you soon.